bad.
What's up? Another episode of the Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Lorenzo, known as Ricky Varandas. It's getting harder instead of easier to do that. I don't know why, but you figure 340-something episodes, I should be getting better at that. But anyways, today we have professor, author, researcher. He was also part of Project Censored. Peter Phillips is with us today, and he's with us today to talk about his book, Giants, the Global Power Elite. We talk about the global elite, think tanks, corporations, the people who are really pulling the strings and influencing the world. Really fun discussion. He also had a great interview with Abby Martins on Empire Files, I believe a year or two ago, so definitely check that out. Now for the business. And unlike many of the capitalistic people that we talk about on this episode, even though this is a value for value show, value doesn't have to be financial. I'm not looking for financial gain if you can't afford it. If you can, then stop being a cheap ass and support the show. Some of you guys have, and I really, really, really appreciate it. I can't thank you guys enough for going in your pockets and donating to this show. From the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate it. Same thing with the people who've been buying merch recently. But if you can't support the show financially, there's plenty of ways to make a difference and support the show. Share the show, review the show, tell people about the show. And for people who have, thank you. And if you're looking to financially support the show, if you can financially support the show, check out my brand new website where it'll have links to all the places you can donate to the show and all the ways you can support the show financially. And also links to all my channels, my Odyssey channel, Rockfin, BitChute, Minds, Rumble, all that stuff. All the places where I'm available on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Parler, everything. Everything, one-stop shop on one website, rippleeffectpodcast.com or rickyvarandas.com. They both take you to the same website. You will also find all three of my shows, the Union of the Unwanted, which I can't recommend the most recent episode with Dr. Robert Malone enough, the Ripple Effect Podcast, and Ricky Rants and Rockfin. So all three shows are there forever, always, uncensored. For example, like my Del Bigtree episode was just censored off YouTube. You can still find it on my website. I'm sure in the future I'm going to have many more episodes with many more guests that are banned or censored on iTunes or YouTube. So if you're using these mainstream platforms, there's always a chance that you might miss an episode due to censorship. So make sure you use Odyssey, Rockfin. Make sure you use Podcast Addict and directly get my RSS feed so you can get the shows right from me. Do all that stuff to bypass any censorship or issues. So that's it, guys. Enjoy the show, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.
PhD at UC Davis, and 30 years ago I was hired at Sonoma State University and have just recently retired there, gone emeritus, and I taught mostly political sociology classes, which included elites and the upper class of the United States and power and inequality and all that macro stuff that we were faced with globally. And started to look at, I had historically been very familiar with upper class of the United States, starting with C. Wright Mills, who wrote in the 50s, the power elite, and addressed, how networks of very important people were managing and controlling society. And as about 20 years ago, we started to see scholars from around the country, William Robinson at UC Santa Barbara, Sklar at the University of London, and talking about the transnational capitalist class, the globalists, the Davos attending power elite who are influencing nation states and are protecting and supporting global capitalism. So in the last 30 years, we've seen this transition essentially from, state managed global capital, state managed capital, and predominantly interest in capitalism was protected by nation states, into a more globalized perspective on what's happening. And so there's transnational policy councils that are coordinating capitalists and capital holders worldwide. Governments are working in their interests. And so that became an interest of mine. And I wrote the book Giants, the Global Power Elite, to focus on who was holding the capital in the world, and how that was managed and protected. And then of course the consequences of that for all of us.
Well, that's a typical question, right? It's a lot of times we're telling stories or we're talking about what's going on in the world. We always say, and they want this and they're doing that and they're influencing
Exactly.
this. And you basically decided to actually investigate who they are, right?
Right. And that had been part of my work for 30 years, but this was concentrated in money management. The firms, the giant firms that have over $1 trillion of investment capital, that they're putting in the stock market, or they're investing in various places, they're buying up world land, agricultural properties worldwide, or a variety of things that they do with that money to get a return. So as we looked at this, and the giants, of course, are these investment companies like BlackRock and Vanguard and JP Morgan Chase, in PEMCO Allianz in Germany, Bank of America, Barclays in Great Britain. They all had over $1 trillion. In fact, BlackRock had 5.4 trillion, and all these numbers are based on 2017 figures. So BlackRock is close to double that now. They're closer to 8 trillion when I last looked. So this wealth concentration, these are firms that take people's capital, excess capital from millionaires and billionaires, and manage it for them. So they will put them in various stocks and investment opportunities worldwide, seeking a 7% or better return, and are quite successful at that. But one of their biggest problem is they have more capital than they've got good opportunities for investment. So there's concentrated wealth, but there isn't all these opportunities for new companies emerging. Put your money in stocks in this. There's not enough of that. So they have a problem, and that ends up turning them to speculative investments. And that's what happened in 2008 with the subprime mortgage loan. They knew that wasn't sustainable, but that was a good place to get a quick return. And billions and billions of dollars were invested in that, and it ultimately all collapsed, close to bringing down the global economy. And if it hadn't been for bailouts from governments, billions and billions of dollars invested in the stock market, invested in the companies and loans, we could likely have seen a total collapse. So that's one of their biggest problems. Now they deal with that in a variety of ways. They're trying to get government to spend more money that they can invest in, and one of the biggest areas of investment is war. So that's one of the reasons that we're seeing permanent war in the world, and permanent kind of capital investment and expansion is to continue to build military machines that are very profitable for the capitalists, for the investment banks, and get good returns on those. So we've been in a state of permanent war, and even though we're withdrawing from Afghanistan, we're still engaged in war all over the world. I mean, we have military troops and special forces in half the nations in the world. So, and that spending, not just here in the U.S., but in Europe and other places as well, profits, concentrated global power elite, the wealth holders that are investing in that sort of thing, in that sort of activity. So that's one of their major. So speculative investments is one of the things that is dangerous about this. And of course, it's very dangerous to continue to have wars worldwide and very wasteful. Consequences are that this capital is increasing concentration. So the rich, common statement, rich get richer, the poor get poorer, is clearly manifested by this capital investment policy practices. And this, of course, feeds right into the environmental issues and global warming. We could stop burning fossil fuels within a few years, literally. But it's very profitable to continue to do so. We're still building cars that use gasoline. We're still doing burning coal for energy. And there's multiple investments that are protected policy-wise, government-wise, that continue to allow that kind of capital investment. Yeah, they're a little worried about it. Some of the people in Davos are saying, well, yeah, we've got to reverse this. We have to reset the world, so to speak. But what that really means is we want to reset the world so we can protect capitalism, that we can protect continued capital investment and concentration of wealth. So in my book, there's 17 giants, and this was 2017. There's many more now, and I'm going to be doing an update on that this year. But those $17 trillion companies held over $40 trillion worth of wealth in the world. Now, this is free-floating capital. This is money. And that's different than owning a building somewhere, which has a value and is part of the $250 trillion worth of wealth that's in the world today. But it's the dominant share of capital and investment capital that these people control worldwide. So this is where, you know, new creations occur, new investments occur, and they're seeking these kinds of returns. They kind of trap themselves. They are stuck in a permanent need to grow and get a return on their capital investment, and this permeates capitalism today worldwide, including the Chinese, and to a certain extent the Russians. World capital is being invested for return of capital, not for the benefit of society or human beings. That's secondary. So that, I think we need to understand, that's very powerful. So these 14 companies or 17 companies holding $40 trillion worth of wealth in 2017 only had 199 directors. So in my book, we identify all those people, and they are the ones deciding how capital is collected and invested. And they overlap. They look very similar. They're all wealthy. Many of them serve on global policy councils and are invested in a variety of different things. They mostly went to elite universities. They live in the major cities, New York, London, you know, Paris. And they all know each other or know of each other. So there's this very small number of people, less than 200. Some of them have died in the last 5 years. Some of them have changed, but they're still probably, you know, 2/3 of the same. And then they get replaced. You know, there's still people that come in and are replaced, and they look pretty much like the ones that are already there. They're predominantly white males from, you know, Western countries. Very few people of color. There's some, but very few. And they are the ones that governments are looking to for direction on how to protect global capital, and policies are made with them in their concerns. Oh, we can't do that. It'll affect the stock market. It'll affect the price returns. We can't, you know, have these kinds of policies that would be good for the world, but aren't good for capital. And that's a major conflict in the world today, is people holding capital, investing in capital, people with wealth. Even if you're a millionaire, multimillionaire, your surplus capital is invested. You allow a major investment company to manage it for you because they're going to get the best returns, and it's less risky. So that's the global situation today, and it certainly is creating and continuing a crisis of humanity. I mean, 80% of the people in the world live on less than $10 a day, and half of them live on less than $3 a day. So those people have zero involvement in terms of capital return and investment, are impacted negatively by wars and environmental consequences, and by just simply being in poverty and being poor. I mean, 30,000 people a day, these are UN numbers, 30,000 people a day die from malnutrition and easily curable basic diseases. And you throw the COVID on top of that, and it's amplified in poor communities around the world. They're not getting the vaccines. I mean, it's an extreme crisis of humanity that is leading towards global collapse. There's no other way to look at it. You cannot perpetuate a system like this inevitably. You can't continue to grow and concentrate wealth without having major collapses at some point. And so that's what Davos is trying to avoid. They're talking about, oh, we got to fix the environment, we have to reduce poverty. These are incremental steps to try to keep global collapse from happening. And their primary mission is to protect global capital and keep it intact. So they sound nice if you read their materials, but you have to look at the underlying motivation that's going on here, and it's quite clear that elites worldwide are seeking to protect their value of their capital. So there's, and it's facilitated in a lot of ways. There's these big policy councils like the Atlantic Council, the Trilateral Commission, that are funded by corporations, not by governments. The Council of 30, that are made up of elites from within this network of capital holders. And they make policy recommendations that governments take as instructions. And they're putting out policy statements. So like the Atlantic Council, which is closely affiliated with NATO, several years ago was saying it was time for a regime change in Russia. And especially after Putin, after we engineered a coup in Ukraine, Putin wasn't going to give up the Crimea, and the people there voted 90% to separate from Ukraine and belong to Russia. So we called that an invasion, but it wasn't. They already had troops there. They had their naval bases there. But it becomes part of the propaganda machine, the anti-Putin propaganda. And that's motivated by elites' desire to have Russia open up for vast investments. Siberia, the forests, the mineral wealth, the oil, capital elites are salivating over being able to invest in that region of the world in a massive way and to own it. I mean, they want to own it outright. So that pushes an anti-Putin policy. Same way with China. The Atlantic Council has recently said it was time for regime change in China to push out the Politburo and the Communist Party and open up greater access for capital investment. And, China has their billionaires, and they do invest. In fact, BlackRock has an office in Beijing. They're allowed to invest. But mostly what's been happening is a massive increase in income and wealth savings accounts and stuff by ordinary people in China. So there's been a real transformation of what was one of the very poor countries, people all over, to a very middle class country, with a huge middle class and the almost complete elimination of poverty in the countryside. Poverty meaning you don't have enough means to meet your basic needs, and you're either starving or living outdoors or just not making it. And instead, we see that to greater extents here in the United States. Homelessness and poverty have increased, and that there seems to be zero interest by elites in fixing that, unless it threatens stability for capital. And that's that what we'll see changes at some point when that happens. But if it happens too quickly, we may not have time to make those changes.
Yeah, there's a professor from Harvard that I was a fan of back in the day, Michael Sandel, and he would I remember reading his book, What Money, I think it was What Money Can't Buy, and he talked about how instead of having a capitalistic economy, we've turned into a capitalistic society where everything is about capital and everything is about this unrealistic expectations of constantly gaining more and more and more and more and more, which isn't realistic, obviously. And companies and those in power, they need to find creative ways of continuing that. If that's planned obsolescence, things failing before they should, so you go out and buy more, that's one way. If it's another technique is maybe suppressing a new technology that will get in the way of a technology that they're benefiting from now. I mean, the electric car, you look at the history of that, and obviously that was some suppressed technology there, and other things like the light bulb conspiracy, where the whole cartel got together and decided to make the light bulb last less long so they can capitalize on making money. So it's almost become and then you see the same thing with the trolley cars in California when they were getting really popular, and then some front company bought them all, crushed them to kind of push the diesel powered PVTAs, public transportation, and come to find out it was a combination of DuPont and Firestone and GM and all these companies that were in collusion together to
They did away with train, that whole train system.
Yep.
In LA, they had a massive transit system in LA that was completely destroyed, and so they could put in highways and sell cars and buses.
Yeah. So this, and so you talk to people, and sometimes you're like, well, capitalism is also what gets you a faster phone and this and that, and and I think there's as many examples of capitalism getting you maybe better stuff as which I guess you can say is a good thing. I guess I mean, from my perspective, it's always like, if my phone never gets any better or my car never gets any faster, I'm not going to be that upset. I'm pretty content with what I have. We don't it's like we don't, it's almost, and this goes back to just marketing and the power of it, and their understanding of constantly convincing you that you need the new shiny thing, the new product, because the old product isn't good enough anymore. And it's just,
or there'll be new software that you have to buy or upgrade, or you'll have to get a new iPhone to get the latest connections and all of that. I'm happy. I use an iPhone to basically take pictures and talk to people on the phone. Other than that, I mean, I don't. It's useless. I have a computer. I'm on it a lot. I communicate well with email, but it's not, doesn't. I don't see needs for massive improvement, and we're pretty stable. And if there's a consequence, if somebody's dying because we're putting our money into cell phones and computers, then there's a moral problem here. I mean, we cannot let a crisis of humanity continue where the environment's destroyed and people are starving to death, and we're just looking the other way. Oh, it's not my fault. They it's just wrong. And so that's an important piece of being a global citizen today is understanding the impacts that that has on all of us.
Well, I think a society is only as strong as its weakest link, right? So I think if there's poverty around me, I can't just ignore it forever. Eventually, it's going to it's going to directly or indirectly affect my life. It's either somebody's going to who doesn't have food or doesn't have water or doesn't have money to pay their bills, they're homeless. They'll end up robbing me or my house or my neighbor or jumping my kids on the way to school, something like that. And so it's like, does it benefit me for everybody to do well? Yeah, because when we all do well, we all do well, and it is this this idea that's almost, and it's funny because I was born in Portugal and I came to America when I was 4, and my parents are farmers from northern Portugal and very simple lifestyle. And then they come to America and they get kind of like sold this idea of like the route to happiness is get that white picket fence and have more ones and zeros in your bank account. And all you have to do is work really hard and sacrifice every waking, every waking second and all the best years of your life and all your energy to a corporation, and that will bring you happiness because then you can finally buy that new car and the nice house. And it's like you look at a lot of the foreigners that I know and even my personal family, they were happy where they came from. It was like there was this trick where they convince you, they sabotage you into believing that, oh, well, if you come here, you'll be happier. It's not that you're not happy here. Yeah, we get it. But like, you'll be happier because you'll have all these shiny things. You'll have all these products, and you almost get tricked into becoming a materialistic person, even though you really weren't where you came from. I mean, my parents were raised on a farm. I mean, looked a lot like their backyard looked a lot like your backyard, and you heard animals. It was peaceful. They didn't have material things, but they always had each other. They had community. They had friendships. They had food because they grew it, and they weren't as dependent on infrastructure or the grocery store or any of that. And sorry, I heard sound like I heard some animals or something. But yeah, so I mean, it is this this thing where you come to America and you get so caught up in this ideology, and then you end up having this epidemic, what I think, of depression and being overprescribed pills and stress and physical and mental health issues because you're looking for happiness in the wrong places and you were sold this lie. And it almost seems like people who have this capitalistic pursuit, yeah, maybe financially they look successful and they look like they're people that we should envy to be, but then you get deeper in their personal lives and they all seem like lunatics. They all neglect their family, their friends, everybody hates them, and it's like, so what did you gain from all this? So but in your book, when you're going deep into this, I know you talk a lot about capitalism, and and I agree with you, as you can tell, in many cases, but I personally, I think in many cases it can't be only money the motivator. When you look at like somebody like Bill Gates or whoever, the real powerful people in the world, it's like they have all the money in the world. They've bought all the material things in the world that they could buy. They've been to every exotic island. Isn't power a part of it too?
Well, certainly power is, but power is centralized in governments and institutions and police states. I mean, that's real power. Now you can influence that and you can be a powerful person, but the power is really about networks and policy groups. So like the Trilateral Commission formed by Rockefeller, back in the 70s, now has some 400 members worldwide. These are the leading capitalists from all the capitalist countries in the world. They meet regionally and then they meet globally and set policy direction. If you're in the White House and there's policy direction being sent, provided by the Trilateral Commission or the Atlantic Council and other places, you pay very close attention because you won't be in power if you ignore them or in some way threaten them. And that's, I think, quite clear. So when we say that wealth concentrated is power, it is. And my next book will focus on how that works and how we network and how there's like private men's clubs worldwide where elites gather and have discussions with each other about what has to happen. And I mean, the Bohemian Grove, where I did my dissertation on them and finished it 27 years ago. I identified everybody there. 1 out of 3 was somebody in a major corporation or top thing. But recently we have looked at the membership list and we've noticed something different. There's 1 out of 10, at least 1 out of 10 people there is on the board of directors of a capital investment company. And so management of wealth and management, particularly of excessive wealth. I mean, you already have a house or 2 houses or 3 houses, 3 cars, and you've traveled the world and all of that. And you still have millions of dollars. People are looking for that money to manage because they're going to try to find places to get a return on it, and they get a percentage. That's what capitalism is today, is money management. And it's not like investing in new things. New things get invested in, but hot stocks, things like that. But overall, it's really about money and capital protection. And governments know that. Intelligence agencies know that. And so the power, the police state power that exists in governments worldwide, capitalist governments, they're there to protect that investment. And if you're a third level dictatorship, or you're a small country somewhere and you're in power, you've borrowed money or you've been invested. There's investors there that if you don't pay attention, you don't do what they need, there'll be a regime change. You'll be out, either assassinated or removed politically. And that's what, our intelligence agencies, Western intelligence agencies, the Saudis and the Israelis too, are about in terms of cooperative actions, is protecting wealth. And anybody that challenges that, nation states, in particular, places like Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, who aren't participating in this global capital system, other than peripherally, are targeted to be removed and eliminated and or invaded. I mean, one of Saddam Hussein's biggest sins was he started selling oil in euros instead of dollars. And that was intolerable. He had to go. Same way with Gaddafi. Gaddafi was demanding that European nations and buy his oil in gold. And that he had to go.
And didn't he also want to create his own currency also?
He was trying to get a universal currency in Africa. And he was organizing, and people were paying attention. And his country, the people there were better off. If you got married, you got a place to live. You could go to university for free. You had health care. I mean, the working people in Libya were better off than many other places around the world. I mean, it's you see very constant, capital places, very strong capitalism places like, the Philippines or Japan, or there's still, maintains this inequality that is there, but they will participate in trying to undermine governments that aren't in support of them, in support of capital.
Yeah, and that's the thing about our foreign policy. It's a great example of how, and first of all, they should have kept the name Department of War. I know they changed it to Department of Defense because it sounds better, but I mean, it really is the Department of War. And when you look at
Permanent war.
What's that?
Permanent war. It's a Department of Permanent War.
But isn't that also, it's the same symptoms of capitalism that you're talking about, like the constant, like you've created a industry, right? Like sometimes you hear about politicians where they make, I don't know, tanks in their state, right? And even though they're not for more government spending, on tanks, if they don't, help push a bill for more military and more war, then maybe their state will suffer because people are lose jobs, right? Because what happens is now there's so much money invested in building these military tanks and bombs and all this stuff, that it's like, how do you stop that? How do you pump the brakes? It's like, you almost have to constantly, it's like that saying, if
Well, if
all
you're in Congress and you do that, you're out. Your
exactly.
opponents will be introduced that are funded massively, and they'll get rid of you, or they will scandal you in some way, or you're going to be targeted.
Well,
And so that we know that's ongoing. And what we don't know is, and because we're not told, is that the corporate media, of course, is the ideological um, protectors of global capital. And and they, of course, MSNBC and Fox and CNN, all of those are owned by the major investors, of these giants. They have, I have a whole chapter on the giants' investments in global media, and that, of course, it means that the public relation firms, which engineer news stories on behalf of their own interests and their paid interests, or global capitalism in general, um, manage and control the news worldwide. That's the ideology of what we understand and know. So we have what I call them the ideologists, and that's the corporate media and the public relation firms that are basically lying to us on a daily basis about what's really happening in the world. And that's ongoing. And then there's the protectors. So the second largest employer in the world behind Walmart, private employer in the world behind Walmart, is G4S, which is a private mercenary security company based in Great Britain. Kind of like Blackwater, only it's huge. And so they have 600,000 employees. They do everything from mercenary work in countries and protecting oil lines to protecting banks and capital here in the United States. So they were the ones with the dogs up in the Dakotas that were attacking the water protectors, the tribal people up there a few years ago. So companies, rich people can hire mercenaries to protect them, hire police forces, and exercise that kind of power, military power, in countries anywhere in the world they choose. It's kind of a wide open thing, and the war, of course, continues in Afghanistan through mercenaries, some 20,000 of them. So, but that's just profit taking for them. If you're a mercenary, you're doing it for money, not for ideology or belief or God and country.
yeah, and
Like
what
the movie goes.
what's the you see a lot of that where they hire these mercenaries and these private companies. What's the big benefit of it? Is it because they don't have the governments that send them there don't have the blood on their hands when something goes wrong? Is that a big part of it?
Well, governments may be reluctant or drag their feet on, making military kinds of actions inside their own country, but they'll look the other way, or they get bought off or paid for. And unless you're a really strong, government militarily, you're vulnerable to outside penetration and money controlling your own police state.
So that's why you would hire a private company.
Exactly. Yeah, and they're widely available. Of course, BlackRock is one of the big investors in these.
Yeah. Yeah, and they get in trouble. I mean, that's why Blackwater, I don't know what their name is now. I lose track of them, but they,
multiple times.
yeah, because they keep getting in trouble. And I was always curious if that was a part of it. Because so when Blackwater gets in trouble, for example, I'll use them as an example. When they do something, then the story's about Blackwater. It's not about the government that hired them or who they were working for. So that would be another incentive in hiring a private company, because again, like if something goes, if the U.S. military kills some innocent bystanders, then it has a huge effect on the government and their spending, and maybe will make people ask questions about what are we doing there and all that stuff. But if Blackwater does it, the headline's about Blackwater, and it's kind of, like I said, the blood's not on their hands. So that's a part of it. When you're doing research and you were looking into, because that's the thing, so often I tell people, I'm like, the people who are really have influence on the world aren't people that'll that the average person knows their name. I mean, how many people knew who the Mercers were and the Mercers family before Trump ran? I mean, how many people knew, even Steve Bannon, who became a household name? I mean, a lot of people didn't know who he was. There's the average person, I should say. So the Carlyle Group, I mean, there's so many companies who have huge influence, and even like you were talking about, some of these think tanks, they have huge influence. Banking, what was it, Obama, right, who got an email from about who he should hire for his staff from one of the big banks, and he basically hired everybody that they suggested. That just shows how much influence Wall Street and these big corporations have. When you were doing research, were there any companies or any people that you were even surprised about how much influence they had all over the world? Anybody that, like, wow, I wasn't even aware, maybe you weren't even aware of them, never mind aware of their influence?
I would say 5 years ago, I didn't know the extent to which G4S and Blackwater were penetrated the world as a police state controls, and that certainly was evident. But as we looked at these companies, I thought my hypothesis was, well, okay, there's capital investment. Who's running the capital? So let's figure that out. So we get into all the records of these companies. You look at their annual returns, and then you see who's on their board of directors and how much money they're making. I mean, if you're on the board of directors of a major corporation, you go to quarterly meetings, and then you're on a committee of some sort, and you get $250,000. I mean, it's some very large amounts of money and free stock. So it's very profitable to be on boards of directors of corporations, and that was interesting. But then one of the things, as we were looking at this, and I said, well, who are these people invested in? We found out that a lot of them are invested in each other to major extents. There's over $400 billion cross-invested between the 17 giants alone. So it's like one big cluster of centralized capital, between all these giants. They all want to see the market continue to grow and rise and get an annual return. So they will influence governments. They will have wars. They will make decisions that impact millions of people in order to make that happen and continue to see that occur. And their interest is capital and return, not human society and humanity.
Yeah, and like we were saying with foreign policy, you look at the people we do business with, the Saudis, because we'll go to Libya and use the justification of human rights. We're there to protect people, or we're in Afghanistan for this reason or that reason. We went to Iraq to protect people because we hated Saddam. And then Saudi Arabia, which has Sharia law and is one of the most extreme of extreme, ideologies in regards to the way they look at the world and that type of stuff. We have no problem doing business with them. We have no problem. And even though they're linked to terrorist attacks, I mean, obviously, the 28 pages that were redacted in the commission report, I mean, there were links to 9/11, and then Obama didn't let what was it, he didn't let the families actually sue or investigate the Saudis after finding out that. And I mean, it's just amazing how it doesn't matter what president is, right or left, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, they all do business with the same countries, the same people. When the royal family comes, they're all friendly with them, and ideology doesn't seem to be important or anything. And it and yet, the public still falls for this trick when we go invade a country. And Syria was actually a pretty good example of how people could speak out, and we can create some type of change if enough of us band together. Because when Obama was trying to convince us to go to Syria, and the people are like, no, you're not going to trick us into another war, it actually, they end up using other tactics like the chemical weapon attacks and the beheadings and all the other tactics. But the U.S. Public pushed back a little bit, and I think that was a good sign. Unfortunately, like you said, there's just so much money involved that I just think that they'll find other ways to trick the public into wars. When we're trying to propagate a war, one thing you see over and over again, like you mentioned, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, they're all pro-war. Like, nobody is anti-war. I mean, everybody is on the same page, and it just shows how much influence they have over everything that happens and everything that we're seeing. And I was listening to a podcast, and they suggested this idea, which I actually, out of all the things we socialize, something that probably is the most important to socialize is probably the media. And like this, it's the first time I've kind of heard this idea in regards to socializing, having the taxpayer fund the media, and then basically they would have no incentive to push a story in one direction or another. Because right now, when we watch the news, like you said, follow the money, and you can kind of figure out, why they're pushing a story in one direction or another.
Well, that's it. People say follow the money, but that's not actually very easy to do. I mean, you can find ownership patterns, and you can see investment patterns and stock purchases, and NASDAQ will give you that information. And so you can determine it all, but it's not always that clear cut. So, Giants, the elite book, and my continued work will focus on where capital is invested, who gets to manage it, and what are the cultural and social interconnections between these people and governments and police states. So that's ongoing work and understanding that I think is essential to really having a clear understanding of what's going on in our own society and in the world today. It's kind of the top of the heap, so to speak. All kinds of social problems that we need to address, a variety of different things. It gets right down to it. To me, this is the number one problem in the world today. It's concentrated wealth, capital, permanent war, environmental crisis, and global inequality, and mass numbers of people dying because of that. And that's there's no excuse for that. And we need to, morally strong, religiously, morally, ethically stand against that, and demand reversals of these policies and this direction. But it's a macro understanding of what's happening, and we don't ever get that in terms of public information. It's just not out there. So you interview me, Abby Martin interviews me, and I've probably done hundreds of interviews around this topic, but it's a drop in the bucket. The book is in 6 languages, which I think is great. But certainly in some places it was never published in German. It was published in Portuguese.
I heard you say that in an interview that it was in Portuguese. I'm like, maybe I should get it in Portuguese for my parents.
Yeah.
Well, this is an issue that regardless what country you're from, you can relate to and you can understand. Because the thing is, it's like that that movie Network from the 70s, and I'm always referencing it because it's true. Like when he's like there is no, I forget what he said, but when he's in that meeting room and he's getting lectured and he's like, there's only DuPont and there's this, and he's naming off corporations and how, you know, basically there isn't ideologies, there is no countries or borders, there's just these international corporations that run everything, and they're influencing Portugal, they're influencing the US, they're influencing everybody everywhere. And for many years, when people talked about the Bilderberg group and they're like, oh, you know, like, what's the big deal? It's just the Bilderberg group. You guys are, it's a conspiracy theory and all this stuff. And it's like, no, think tanks and these big, these meetings of the minds with the elite all over the world. I mean, they have huge influence. I mean, you look at PNAC and before 9/11 and what they what they wanted to do, you know, with influence in the Middle East. I mean, that all happened. And I talking to a lot of researchers, one of my favorites, James Corbett, who's been on the show a bunch of times, he we always talk about this, how it's like they're openly telling you, like in many cases, just nobody's watching, the think tanks and the videos and the World Economic Forum podcast. Nobody's listening to that. But if you were, you could kind of get an idea of like, okay,
figure it out. If you watch what the elites are saying, you read their books, you look at their policy statements from the Atlantic Council and the Trilateral Commission or the Council of 30 for that matter, you can have a pretty clear understanding of where they're going and what they want to do. They just won't put it in a digestible 5-minute newscast that anybody can understand unless you understand how the structure works and how it's laid out. And that's, I think, one of the contributions Giant's book makes. And I want to continue to increase and look at how that is working, because I think we've seen even in the last 5 years massive kind of concentration continue to occur, and regime changes and things have happened that are indicators of that as well. So we're in dire straits, I think, politically, in terms of personal freedoms. And like Davos is just all over the COVID crisis, in terms of accelerating what they think needs to happen, and that's concentrated control of human beings, ideologically and physically. So,
well, isn't that the concern? Is always like, so you have the World Economic Forum and you got Klaus Schwab, talking about the environment and all this stuff. It's like, does he really give a F about the environment, or is he just, because that's the thing. So often maybe a moral and good idea will be co-opted, right? It'll be somebody will have their heart in the right place, so they'll really care about a topic or issue, and then the elite or some corporation or politicians or whatever will just use it as a pawn in their game, and they'll just use it and they'll just take advantage of people who actually are trying to make a difference.
Absolutely. I mean, that's absolutely correct. And they will use, so the World Economic Forum has been talking about environmental problems now for several years. And you look at their annual reports and you listen to some of the speeches that people are giving there, and the whole reset
Agreed.
agenda that they're talking about, that Klaus has written about. It still is a way of protecting and continuing the existence of global capital concentration of wealth and capitalism and growth like that, versus any form of socialism, human betterment, communal development, Christianity at its source kind of approach.
Yeah, the Great Reset. He wrote the book also, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's just it's scary because I can see how it's going to happen. You can kind of foresee how they're gonna, you're gonna give them more and more power, and they're going to protect you. They're there to save you. It's like, don't take any personal responsibility and just give them more funds, more resources, more of your privacy, more of your freedoms, and then they protect you. And you know, I just it's you can see it happening, and I, like I said, I think people, their heart will be in the right place and they'll fall for it because they truly believe that they're going to make a difference. And it's hard to argue with those people because, and it's hard to convince them. You know, it's like one of my favorite quotes. I don't know if it was Mark Twain. It just seems like every good quote was by Mark Twain. So I'm just going to assume it was Mark Twain. He said it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. And it's so true. You know, when somebody's been tricked, it's hard to kind of snap them out of it. And you see it even with the COVID thing, like you said, and environmental issues, all these things. It's so often that it's like, okay, yeah, maybe there is an issue here that we should focus on and think about. And then somebody will swoop in and be like, well, how do we profit from this issue? You know, and then, you know, next thing you know, it's like, holy crap, you know, like we're supposed to make a difference, and now all we're doing is filling the pockets of these rich and powerful.
Well, for all of us, I think there is a moral code that has been preset that we can look to and follow. And that's after World War II, an international committee led by Eleanor Roosevelt came up with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And they spent a couple of years putting that together. And it's a very strong document that establishes what are the core values and rights of human beings, because they're human beings. And it's not taught in schools. It's almost like ignored in the corporate media. Human rights to most people means you're not torturing somebody. Human rights are quite broad, and that declaration, it's at the end of the book, Giants. It should be on everybody's coffee table. Should be family dinner discussions in terms of what it means to be a human being and what your rights are, your natural rights are as a human being. And having that kind of conversation, that kind of discussion, with an awareness of what elites are doing and how they violate all of those on a daily basis, regularly around the world. And they know that there's a problem. I mean, they have grandkids. They know that those kids may not have a life that's sustainable on this earth, you know, in 70 years. So we have to appeal to them, shame them, and that's why identifying who they are, I think, is an important thing to do.
Do you think there's any rights or freedoms? Are they ever justified to be given up for, I guess, the greater good? Because that's kind of what we're convinced, right? That they convince us that it's like, well, you're giving this up, or you have some human rights that you're giving up, but it's for the greater good. It's for this. It's for that. Should we just draw the line and be like, listen, this isn't debatable. Like, we have human rights, we have freedoms, and we shouldn't ever sacrifice any of those.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All human beings deserve to have adequate, you know, food, shelter, clothing, recreation, um, you know, emotional support. Every human being deserves that. And to say anything less is to undermine what it means to be human, what it means to be a conscious being living on this planet. And, you know, which we share. And it's been corrupted by concentration of wealth and power that impacts and destroys the lives of millions of people. Just our invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, you know, killed millions of people. That continues to go on. The invasion of Vietnam killed millions of people. We are a pariah nation in terms of our military use, and capitalism is the agenda that they are protecting, and it's done in that name, to protect wealth and that. So, yeah, we have some deep moral obligations to challenge this in a very open, democratic, due process way. I mean, clearly believe in decision making at the lowest possible level, democracy-wise, and that has to happen, or else we're in a state of crisis, permanent crisis that could lead to our global collapse.
Yeah, and another group of people that I think people should be very just aware of is the power. I think the military, when I first got into just really researching a alternative perspective of the world and history, the military industrial complex was definitely what I thought was the biggest threat to humanity. But now you look at like big pharma, you look at all these other, I mean, you're talking about mainstream media. Every other commercial is a big pharma commercial, which means they're paying for their salary. The news that you're being given is how are you gonna expect these anchors to ever say anything bad about the people who are paying their salary and for their big incomes and houses and vacation homes and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think people have to be aware of even the media is for profit, and so many of these things that we think have internally are moral, they're businesses, and they'll do, it's like that saying, if it bleeds, it leads. It's about ratings, it's about getting eyes on the TV. So yeah, without a doubt. But for people listening who want to follow your work, know where the best place to get your book, any social media platforms you might be on, can you let people know?
Well, sure. The book is available in bookstores worldwide. Amazon, of course, have it. I encourage people to buy it through projectcensored.org, which was I was the director of Project Censored for 14 years, and I'm still closely connected to the people that put out the annual news stories that weren't covered by the corporate media. They sell the book there as a way of raising money for Project Censored and global freedom of the press. So that's an important place. And a lot of what I have written is on the Project Censored website. So my research over the years on elites, on various corruption, even on I did a study about a year and a half ago on PG&E and how they're burning up California and the profits they're taking from that, and how their board of directors were mostly people from outside the state. I mean, they're a corrupt company, and they, of course, were now we recognize that the Dixie Fire in California, second largest in the country, was started by them. So there's, they are outlaws, literally, and have killed thousands of people through their policies. And they just want to protect that concentrated capital. Their stock went down to zilch when it was like 60 or 70 bucks, and now it went down to 5 or 6, and they're trying to build that back up. And BlackRock and the investment capital places all own that stock, and so it's protecting global capital to keep PG&E in power in this country and in California, and it's one of the largest public utility companies going, and it's all about profit and control, and yet they're criminally negligent in terms of starting fires.
Isn't so the left thinks that like often they think like governments, or the left thinks the corporations are the root of all evil, the right thinks governments are the root of all evil and they're the issue. I mean, researching the elites, aren't they intertwined? I mean, it's all the same thing, right? I mean, it's almost like the line between corporations and governments are so blurry because they all work together, and
money, concentrated money, and who owns it, and all of them are wealthy stockholders and have their capital controlled or managed by one of these big management firms. So yeah, they have very similar interests, and are protecting those interests, and will never challenge the structure of how all of this is occurring.
Yeah, that's why the Jeffrey Epstein story was so interesting, because the amount of influence he had, because he was hanging out with all these people, these powerful people, and all the blackmailing that was going on. And it just, you could see how somebody like him, with so many people that he was hanging out with, and the ability to blackmail all of them. I mean, the amount of influence he must have, and just to sway things in one direction or another, was just mind-boggling. And then to see just so many powerful people who hung out together at the same places, that's the other thing about, you look at the Bilderberg group, you look at like how many of these guys are from Skull and Bones, and they're all from the same clique. They're all from like, if it was high school, they'd all be in the same group sitting at the same table at lunchtime. It's like
right.
They're
They'd be running student government, or student government would be totally influenced by them, or yeah, I mean, and it's kind of yeah, and the most popular ones were in the most organizations, which is kind of true with elites. I mean, they'll go to Bilderberger, they'll go to Davos, they'll be on the Trilateral Commission, they'll be on the Council of Foreign Relations, and on 3 or 4 corporate boards, and wealthy in their own right. Live in New York City, belong to, private men's clubs, go to Bohemian Grove in the summer. I mean, it's a global network of very elite, powerful people, in the 1% or the 1,000th of 1%, the way Sklar talks, and so the super elite.
Yeah, well, I remember Jesse Ventura I don't know if he said it when he was on my show or when he was doing another interview about how politics is like pro wrestling. When they're on TV, it looks like they hate each other, but behind the scenes, if they can help each other's career, they're all having dinner together and lunch together, they're all hanging out, and it's all theater. And it really is. I mean, it's same thing with these. They all hang out together. I mean, you see it over and over again with, like, here's this person who gets in trouble, if it's a politician or the head of a corporation, and then all these pictures will pop up of them hanging out with people from the left, people from the right, hanging out. It's like they all hang out in the same group. And a lot of times is infighting with between the left and the right, people of different ideologies. And I'm not the whole left and right thing is silly, because in my opinion, I'm a political atheist. I'm one of those people. I'm homeless when it comes down to politics. I don't, I think that these issues are too complex to be able to fit in one bubble or another. This idea that in America we only have 2 political parties, and all my perspectives on all these very complex issues can just fit in the box of the left or the box of the right, I think is silly. I think most people are just kind of joining a team and defending that team's ideology, and not really dissecting these ideas and challenging these ideas. But yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder if any of these people have ideologies, or if this left versus right thing is almost strictly for the purpose of divide and conquer, getting all of us fighting among ourselves, while the people who are influencing the world and pushing, really influencing where policy goes and what happens in the world, they don't care. They don't care about the being honest with their morals or ideologies. They just care about more, like you said, more capital and more power.
Another Occupy will occur. Another yellow shirt movement will occur. People around the world are recognizing that they're not getting to participate and play in this, and that the opportunities for themselves and their children are gone. Are gonna resist, are gonna revolt. Not necessarily violently, because I really hope that our revolt is disruption and non-violent non-cooperation with global power. And I think that's the only way. If not, we'll destroy the world, or we'll end up with a massive police state, even more so than what we've got. And we've got an accelerating police state with all the SWAT teams and everything else that's happening, privatized military, the police departments militarized. It's just very, very concerning, and represents a complete loss and diminishing of freedom for individuals.
Without a doubt, yeah, and that's also.
I'm gonna need to bail out here pretty quick.
But yeah, and that's also in regards to or related to war, because a lot of this just equipment that they didn't end up using, that that we made too many of this, too many of that, they were just giving them out to police departments, and it's like that saying, if everything, or if the only thing you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, when you're giving SWAT, I mean, I think a local town where I live,
Now carriers and everything else. I mean,
yeah, it's ridiculous. But thank you so much, Peter. I don't want to take up your time much more, but thank you so much.
I'm glad to see you and your program. It sounds great. And let me know, send me a connection for this, and I will certainly get it posted, and so other people can see it.
Yeah,
And
I'll send links to you once it's up and live. Hopefully it'll be before the end of the week, and I'll send you all the links. And if you ever want to come back on to promote your next book or just talk about anything that's going on in the world, feel free, hit me up, and I'll be more than happy to have you on.
Happy to do that. My good friend Mickey Huff, who's director of Project Censored now, has the program Censored on Pacifica, Project Censored show, and they're on 50 stations, and of course they're on the internet and stuff like that. And we kind of had that same agreement. I helped him found that show 11 years ago, and I did it for 7. But it's I'm retiring and trying to not be doing a million things simultaneously and enjoy being in my 70s and
Yeah. You're retired and
continuing to focus on the research that I like.
yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, if you're retired, you actually want to feel retired and not be too busy.
That's kind of where we've gotten to and how we're thinking about things. Yeah.
Great, Peter. But yeah, thank you so much. Anytime you want to come on, and good luck with the next book. I'll definitely keep track of when it comes out, and I'm sure I'll see the updates and reconnect and hopefully promote that. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. We'll keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Peter. Take care.